So in the last few lectures, we've sketched Sartre's views on radical freedom, right? Sartre thinks that we are free and that our choices are constantly involved in our lives, right? Even when we might not realize that we are making a choice, we are making a choice, right? You go through habitual motions, you drink your coffee in the morning, you go to work or school or whatever. Sartre would say, you don't realize you're making a choice, but you are, even in performing these habitual day-to-day actions, making a choice. You could do something else. You could skip work, right? You could decide that there's a better use of your time in the morning than sitting there drinking your coffee and doing the crossword or whatever, right? Whatever it is you do in the morning, you can decide there's a better way to spend your time. If you come home in the afternoon or evening, watch television, goof off on the internet, you might not realize it, but you are constantly making a choice then. There are other things you could be doing with your time, and you are choosing not to do them. You are making a choice for goofing off on the internet, watching TV, and against all the other things you could be doing with that specific bit of time. And Sartre says, freedom is in a sense terrifying. It is hard. Responsibility is hard. So we try to deceive ourselves about it. We try to avoid responsibility. That's what he calls bad faith, right? Avoid this consciousness, this acknowledgement of your freedom and the responsibility that it brings with it. Authenticity is to face up to your responsibility and your freedom. Now look, all of this is inspiring in one sense. It's also terrifying. It's very hard-nosed. It is a heroic vision of humanity and the human condition. In that sense, I think it's inspiring, right? And a lot of things that are inspiring are also pretty hard, right? But why I think it's true, right? I mean, you can see why this resonates with Sartre's audience. It describes their experience of the war period very well, right? If you were a person in occupied France, not doing anything, just going about your day-to-day business, not resisting the Nazis, trying to ignore them as far as possible, was a choice, a very real choice. Some people heroically resisted, some people collaborated. If you're in Sartre's audience, this will ring very true to you. But is that a reason to think it's true, right? We might like this vision. We might not like it. We might, if you're me, simultaneously like something about it at the same time. It's terrifying, maybe even repellent. But is all that a reason to think it's true, right? A story can be a good one without being a true story. This is a good story. Is it a true one? Well, what is Sartre's argument then? Or evidence? What can he show? What can he point to say you should believe this? I think he would just point toward ordinary experience, right? This matches if you're honest with yourself, this matches your experience of choice and freedom and what your situation is. When I point it out to you, you will see that yes, this is really making a choice. That there is freedom in all these cases, even if you might like to deny it. Sartre's philosophical method, he has a foot in this movement called phenomenology. It very much is to show that I'm giving an accurate description of what experience is. Well, you might think, well, that's not much of an argument, but let me give you guys an example. Suppose that someone had a machine that could supposedly predict your behavior. And they give you some evidence for this, right? Um, you know, I don't know what that evidence would be. One problem is, of course, if the machine predicted your behavior instantly, the fact it's predicting your behavior would have some influence on your behavior. So if the machine said, well, right now you're going to drink a cup of coffee, there's always the problem of like, no machine, no, I'm not. I'm going to go dump the coffee out, right? It's one thing about human beings. Predictions about human beings, theories about human beings change our behavior. Well, but look, let's imagine we could get around this somehow, right? Maybe the machine gives a printout of exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow and we seal it in an envelope. Show in some way that nobody can meddle with this, nobody can mess with it. It's in this envelope. You can't get to it. Well, we open up the next day, I see like a completely accurate record of what I've done. you know, or you can imagine other ways. So I decide this machine can predict my behavior. I get this evidence that it can, right? Well, Sartre would say even if we find out that the machine can perfectly predict our behavior, we still have to decide what to do in light of that, right? If I sit down and I say, if I say, well, choice doesn't matter, I'm just going to go lay down in my bedroom and never do anything again, Sartre would say, well, look, the machine showing you that it can predict your behavior didn't dictate that, right? It didn't, make you go lie down in a dark room and not do anything. You chose to do that in light of the information it gives you. Other people might not do that, right? For one thing, Sartre would again say, depending on the evidence, you have to decide, is it good evidence that your behavior is determined and predictable? But even if it is, you still have a choice of what to do in light of that fact. You might say, well, okay, but look, if I get this information from the machine and I just sit down and do nothing, well, then I'm not making a choice, right? You, Sartre, say freedom is inescapable, choice is inescapable. If I just sit down and decide not to do anything because all my choices are determined, doesn't that show that you, Sartre, are wrong? And Sartre will say, choosing not to make a choice is still a choice. Now that sounds paradoxical. You might say, well, this sounds really unimpressive. Okay, Sartre, that sounds like some stoner wisdom. Like, man, not making a choice is still making a choice, man. I actually think this is a pretty deep insight, right? If, in a lot of cases, if you're presented some options and you just refuse to do anything, it's not as though, well, I'm not making a choice. It's like, well, I don't like either of these options. I'm taking a third one, right? If you hate both people who are running for president and you say, well, I'm not going to vote, you're not avoiding the choice. You're just making a choice not to vote, right? Maybe you don't pick Clinton or Trump. Maybe you hate both of them. But it's not as though you avoid the choice entirely. You, by choosing not to vote, by choosing not to choose between these two people, are in a very real sense making another choice. The guy who gets his readout from the prediction machine goes and sits down, never does anything again. Well, it's not as though he is avoiding choice. He is just making a certain choice in light of what this machine has told him. And Sartre will say this always holds true. No matter how good a theoretical proof of determinism might be, from the first person, as an individual, you have to make choices. You can't avoid that. If I gave you an ironclad proof of determinism. Determinism is absolutely true. You would, is just as much as you do now, still have to make choices. What time do you get up tomorrow? Do you drink a cup of coffee or don't you? Do you go into work or do you skip work? Do you do your homework or not, right? Those choices will not vanish just because you get some good theoretical argument for determinism. We talk all we want about moral luck. You know, the two drunk drivers, the fact remains, they both do the same thing. The fact remains, even if you are super impressed by this argument about moral luck, if you go to a bar and you have a few too many drinks, you still face the choice, do I get a cab? Do I walk home? Do I do the wrong thing and drive, right? You still face that choice. It still is a choice, no matter how impressed you might be about moral luck, right? You're not sure if you left the stove on. Do you say, oh, the chances I left it on are small, don't be, whatever? Or do you go back and check the stove, right? No matter how much you read about moral luck or be convinced by it, that is still the choice. If you are a Frenchman in the 40s, you might say to yourself, Nagel hadn't written his essay yet, but you might say to yourself, isn't it unfair that I face this choice whether to do nothing, resist the Nazis, or collaborate with them? Isn't it unfair I face this hard choice? Sartre would say, nonetheless, you face the choice, and moaning about it and doing nothing because you think it's unfair is itself a choice. It's not as though you are in the driver's seat of your life and you could just step out of it, right? Oh, I find out about determinism, I'm going to step out and just let other things take over or put my life on autopilot. You can't do that. From the first person perspective, as an individual, you must act, you must make choices. The same considerations that hold for finding out that determinism is true or whatever would hold for any supposed theoretical fact about human nature. Anything we might find out about human beings, you still have to decide what's this, first thing Sartre would say, you have to decide, is it true? But even if the evidence is such you can't deny it's true, you still have to decide what significance it has for you and how you are going to act in light of it. We find out human beings are selfish. I don't know that that's true, but if it is, are you going to use that as an excuse to be a jerk? Or are you going to react to that by saying, well, I have to try that much harder to be decent? The same considerations hold for any facts or features about yourself. I know I'm bad at keeping secrets. When someone says to me, I'll tell you, but you have to, you can't tell anyone. Maybe I say, no, I know this fact about myself, don't tell me, I will tell. If I do promise, then, even if it's hard, I have the choice, do I tell or not? So on and so forth, right? Sartre talks about somebody, if you fail in what you try to do you become bitter and, oh, I couldn't do this, I'm whatever, a bitter failure? Do you try again at the thing you failed at, or do you pick some new thing in light of that, right? The choice is yours. All right. So that, I think, is Sartre's main argument for this. from the first person, it's just undeniable that you always face choices and you cannot avoid or deny that.